Clementine Harrow did not flinch. Not when Thaddeus's voice carried across the Whitby dining room with the easy certainty of a man who has never once been told he is wrong. Not when the silverware stilled around a table set for 20. Not when Mrs. Colonel Whitby's fan dropped to her lap and stayed there. Clementine set her wine glass on the tablecloth with both hands. Careful, deliberate. The way her mother had taught her to set things down when she was afraid they might shatter. And looked at her husband across 8 feet of candlelit mahogany. "I've made a decision," Thaddeus said. He was addressing the table. Not her. That was the first thing she would remember later, lying awake in her aunt's spare room, with the Georgia crickets going outside and the night pressing in close. He had not looked at her when he said it. "The arrangement between Clementine and myself has run its course. She would be better suited to a life more consistent with her temperament." The arrangement. 3 years and 4 months of marriage, and he called it the arrangement. She waited 3 seconds, long enough for the word to settle into the room and show everyone exactly what it weighed, and then she rose from her chair. She smoothed the front of her gown. She turned to her hostess. "Mrs. Whitby," she said, "thank you for a lovely evening. You must share your cook's receipt for the pheasant." She walked to the door. The Whitby's butler held it open. His face was carefully blank in the way of a man who has witnessed something he will be describing in the kitchen for the rest of the season. "Thank you," she said to him. She had always thanked the help. She always would. The October night outside was cool and sharp with the smell of turned earth and wood smoke. She stood on the front step for exactly 1 moment and breathed it in. Then she crossed the drive to find Josiah. Josiah had been with the Harrow household 9 years. He was already on his feet when he saw her coming alone. His expression was the careful nothing of a man working very hard to show nothing. "Take me home, Josiah," she said. "Yes, ma'am." He didn't ask about Mr. Harrow. She rode back through the dark Georgia roads in silence. The carriage lamps threw small gold circles on the road ahead, and above the pines the stars were out in force. Bright and indifferent and entirely beautiful. She had loved the night sky here from the first week of her marriage, when she had not yet understood that the house she had married into was the kind that let nothing in. She had tried to tell Thaddeus once, early on, that the stars in Savannah seemed closer than they did in Augusta where she'd grown up. He had looked up, said, and gone back to his newspaper. She thought about that. She thought about all the M's. The collected weight of 3 years of half-attention. Of words that had died in the space between her mouth and his comprehension. Of opinions she had learned to package smaller and smaller, until they barely took up any room at all. The carriage stopped at the front of the house. She went directly to her room. Tess was there. Tess who had been her mother's girl before she was Clementine's. Tess who could read the state of a room in the time it took to open a door. One look at Clementine's face and she asked nothing. She simply went to the wardrobe. "Not those," Clementine said. "We're packing." Tess turned. Something moved through her expression. Concern, then understanding, then a steady, practical resolve. "How much?" she asked. "Only what's mine," Clementine said. "What was mine before?" Tess looked around the room, at the Harrow jewelry on the dressing table, at the cashmere wrap Thaddeus had given her in the 2nd month of marriage, when he had still occasionally given her things, at the silver-backed brushes with the Harrow crest. "That ain't a great deal in this house," Tess said. "I know," Clementine said. "It won't take long." It didn't. She took her mother's garnet earrings, and the small oil painting of the Ogeechee River her father had commissioned as a wedding gift. She took the 3 books from the shelf with her name written inside the covers. She took her personal letters and the household account ledger she had been keeping since the 1st month of marriage, not as evidence of anything, simply because every figure in it was in her handwriting and was, in a real sense, entirely her work. She sat at the writing desk and wrote a letter. It took 4 drafts. She had a great deal she could have said. The anger was there. The grief too, though she was surprised to find that the grief was mostly for the person she had believed he might become, rather than the one he was. In the end she wrote 6 sentences. She left the letter on the desk where it would be found. 2 trunks. That was 3 years and 4 months of a life. 2 trunks and 6 sentences and her mother's garnet earrings. "Where are we going?" Tess asked. Clementine had thought about this on the carriage ride home. Her mother's older sister, Mildred Price, lived a half-day's drive west near Millen. A woman who had been widowed at 34 and had, in the 16 years since, built herself something self-sufficient and unassuming and entirely her own. Aunt Mildred had sat beside Clementine at the wedding reception and said, very quietly, under the noise of the celebration, "If you ever need somewhere to be, the door is open." Clementine had not known what to do with that at the time. She had been a bride. She had been hopeful. "Aunt Mildred's," she said. Tess nodded once, as if she had been expecting this answer for some time. Josiah drove without complaint into the Georgia night. They arrived just past 3 in the morning. Mildred Price came to the door in her dressing gown with a lamp and an expression that asked no questions and required no explanation. She stepped aside, let them in, and put the kettle on. Thaddeus Harrow did not sleep that night either, though for entirely different reasons. He told himself on the carriage ride home that what he had done was necessary, decisive, the kind of clean action a man owed himself after a marriage that had never become what it was supposed to be. He told himself Clementine would be at home when he arrived, that she would have composed herself, that they would speak sensibly in the morning and arrive at some practical arrangement. He walked into a dark house. He went to his room. He did not sleep. At 5 in the morning he gave up and went downstairs and found Mrs. Sutton, the housekeeper, already in the corridor, with her hands folded, and her face holding an expression he had never seen on it before. Mrs. Sutton had been in this house 11 years and had survived a flooded cellar, 2 changes of cook, and a fire in the east storage room. She was not a woman given to visible disturbance. She looked shaken. "Where is Mrs. Harrow?" Thaddeus said. "She left last night, sir. She and Tess. Josiah drove them." A pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. "She left a letter on the writing desk in her sitting room." He went upstairs. He had not been in Clementine's room he calculated this with a sudden uncomfortable clarity. 4 months. The room was in perfect order, the bed made, the dressing table cleared, the wardrobe doors standing open, half the hooks empty. The letter was on the desk, sealed, his name on the front in her handwriting. Her handwriting, which was the most orderly he had ever encountered. Even spaced and unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world and chose to use it precisely. He broke the seal. "Thaddeus, you have stated publicly that our arrangement has run its course. I have accepted this. I have taken only what was mine and left everything else in order. The household accounts are current through the end of the month. Mrs. Sutton knows the arrangements for the November provisioning. There is nothing left undone. I hold no bitterness toward you and wish you well. I ask only that you allow me the same, Clementine Fairfax." She had signed it with her maiden name. 6 sentences, he counted them twice. He stood at the window, with the letter in his hand, and looked out at the morning coming up cold and indifferent over his property, and he thought about nothing left undone. He thought about a woman who had been publicly dismissed at a dinner table, and had spent the hours between midnight and dawn, making sure the household accounts were current before she left. He set the letter back on the desk. He did not fold it. He was not sure his hands would cooperate with that level of precision. Day 1. He noticed the breakfast. Not that anything was wrong with it. It was properly prepared and appropriately presented. But some quality of it was missing, some particular care in the arrangement that he could not name, and it took him, until the second cup of coffee, to understand that for 3 years, Clementine had been quietly supervising the kitchen. He had never once considered it. Day 2. He could not find the contract files for the Calderon land lease. He needed them before Thursday's meeting with the county assessor. He searched for half an hour, went to Mrs. Sutton with what he hoped was not visible irritation, and asked where they were kept. Mrs. Sutton said, with a neutrality that was beginning to feel pointed, that Mrs. Harrow had always maintained the correspondence files, and that she herself was not entirely familiar with the system. They found the files eventually. They were exactly where sensible logic said they should be, cross-referenced and dated in Clementine's handwriting, every document placed as if she had assumed someone might one day need to find it without her help. He stood with the Calderon file in his hand and thought about the system, about what it had taken to build it, about the fact that he had been living at the center of it for 3 years and had never once asked how it worked or who had made it work. Day 3. Aubrey Whitfield stopped by to discuss a fence line and managed, with the particular embarrassed indirection of a man delivering unpleasant news, to mention that people were talking. "What kind of talk?" Thaddeus said. Whitfield looked at the brim of his hat. "That you handled it poorly. That Clementine Harrow is a woman of genuine good character who didn't deserve to be called an arrangement in front of the county." He put the hat back on and looked directly at Thaddeus. because Whitfield was a man who delivered honest assessments and had the character to watch them land. I've always thought you trusted the wrong sources too easily. I'm saying it now because you ought to know." He left. Thaddeus sat with a glass of bourbon at 11 in the morning and thought about wrong sources. He thought about Vivica Stanhope. Vivica had come to Savannah from Charleston 2 years prior, a widow of means and considerable social ease who had attached herself to the Harrow circle with the patient, graceful certainty of a woman who knows exactly where she wants to be and is in no hurry about getting there. She was handsome and well-read and unfailingly warm toward Clementine in company. 6 months ago, in private, she had told Thaddeus that Clementine had been exchanging letters with a man in Augusta named Robert Doyle. She had said it gently, with the face of a concerned friend. She had said she wasn't certain it meant anything. She had said she only mentioned it because she thought he deserved to know. Thaddeus had not verified it, had not asked Clementine, had let it settle in him the way these things settle, gathering weight in the dark, becoming conviction without ever becoming fact, until the weight was enough to carry into the Whitby dining room and set down on a table of 20. He sent for the facts now. It took 4 days. Robert Doyle was Clementine's second cousin on her father's side. He had been present at a legal proceeding in Augusta the previous spring concerning her late father's estate. That was the entire account. There was not a single verifiable fact behind the story Vivica had handed him. He sat with this in his study for a long time, then he sent for Vivica. She came with the warm, sympathetic expression of someone performing their best version of concern. He did not ask her to sit. "The story you told me about Clementine," he said, "about Robert Doyle." Something behind her eyes went very still. "He is her cousin," Thaddeus said. "There was a legal matter involving her father's estate. That is the complete account. There is nothing else." He looked at her steadily. "You handed me a story you knew I wanted to believe, and I took it without question because I was already looking for a reason. The choice was mine, but I'd ask you not to come here again." She left without warmth. The house felt emptier after. He sat in the parlor and thought, this is what I chose instead of her. The rumors reached Aunt Mildred's house on a Tuesday. Vivica Stanhope, it seemed, had been very quiet about the matter and very effective. She had not said anything direct. She had said, in several parlors, that these situations were always more complicated than they appeared. That there were always reasons a gentleman might not state publicly. That she hoped Clementine would find peace somewhere. A neighbor woman named Mrs. Kessler delivered this news, with a jar of preserved peaches and the careful expression of someone carrying weight they'd rather not. Clementine heard her out at the kitchen table and thanked her genuinely when she finished. After Mrs. Kessler left, Mildred sat down across from her without speaking. She waited. She had learned in 16 years of living alone that silence was usually the most honest gift. "I've been quiet for a very long time," Clementine said finally. "I kept quiet about Vivica because I thought raising it would look like jealousy. I kept quiet about how alone I felt in that house because I thought it would sound like complaint." She looked at her hands. Silence wasn't safe. It only gave other people space to fill with whatever suited them. Mildred was quiet a moment. "Your mother was quiet too," she said, not critically, just as a fact that had been true a long time. She thought it kept things smooth. What it did was let things go unnamed long enough to become permanent. Clementine looked at her. "The question isn't whether you answer them," Mildred said. "The question is how." That night, Clementine sat at the small writing desk in the spare room and wrote to Judge Stafford, who had been at the Whitby dinner, who had known her father, and who possessed the particular quality of a man who values accuracy over convenience. She stated facts, only facts. Her own conduct, her own record, the exact nature of what had occurred. She asked for nothing except that he be willing, at his convenience, to hear a true account from someone who had one. She sealed it and handed it to Josiah in the morning. In the weeks she had been at Aunt Mildred's, Clementine had already made herself useful in ways she had not planned. She had reorganized the pantry, which had been in considerable disorder. She had written letters for Mildred, who had functional literacy but found formal correspondence uncomfortable. She had sat twice with old Mr. Hennessy from the neighboring property and listened to him talk about his life, and had come away from those conversations knowing more than she had learned from an entire social season in Savannah. And she had started teaching. A girl named Rue, the daughter of one of Mildred's farmhands, 11 years old, quick-eyed and grave-faced, and burning with a particular hunger that Clementine recognized the moment she saw it, had appeared at her door on the fourth morning with a spelling primer and the carefully managed hope of a child who has decided to try for something and is not entirely certain it will be offered. Clementine had simply moved aside. "Come in, sit down, let's start at the beginning." Rue was currently working through compound words with the focused intensity of someone who has decided this is serious business and intends to treat it accordingly. Teaching Rue, Clementine began to remember something she had been slowly forgetting for 3 years. That she was good at this. Good at seeing exactly where a person was and meeting them there without ceremony. Good at the kind of patient particular attention that made a person feel that what they were working toward mattered. She had been doing it inside the Harrow household, in every room and every season, and it had felt increasingly like pouring water into sand. Out here, something stayed. Judge Stafford called a meeting on a Friday. He sent notes to 8 households and did not explain his purpose. He said only that he had a matter of community record he wished to address, and that he expected their attendance. 8 households became, within 2 days, half of Chatham County, knowing something was happening at Stafford's house, and trying to determine what. Clementine received her note on Wednesday. She read it, folded it, and set it beside the box where she kept the 2 letters Thaddeus had sent her over the preceding weeks. One stiff apology, one longer accounting that had surprised her with its absence of self-defense. She had read each of them twice. She had not replied to either. Friday morning she and Mildred drove to the Stafford house. The parlor held 15 people. Aubrey Whitfield was there and gave her a plain nod of respect. Mrs. Whitby was there, with the expression of a woman who feels genuine regret about what her dining room had been made to hold. She did not see Vivica Stanhope. She did see Thaddeus. He was standing at the side of the room, not seated, in plain clothes without the social ease he usually wore like a second coat. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping particularly well. When she came in, he looked at her first, before he looked at anyone else in the room. Judge Stafford entered and began without ceremony. "There is false information circulating in this county regarding Mrs. Clementine Fairfax and the conduct of her marriage," he said. "I have examined the facts. I am prepared to state, before witnesses, that there is no verifiable basis for any suggestion of impropriety on Mrs. Fairfax's part. Not one fact. What there is a story constructed for purposes unrelated to truth, and circulated by a party who will find this community's goodwill considerably less available going forward." The room held very still. "Furthermore,"
Stafford said,
"I will state for the record that during her time managing the Harrow household, Mrs. Fairfax conducted herself with a level of competence and integrity that reflects well on her, and poorly, I will be direct, on the household that failed to see it." He stepped aside. Thaddeus stepped forward. He did not look comfortable. He appeared to have decided that comfort was beside the point. "What happened at the Whitby house was wrong," he said. "Wrong in what I said, wrong in the way I chose to say it, and wrong in the reasoning that led me there. I accepted a story without examining it. I used it to do something in public that I never had the right to do publicly or privately." He stopped. "Clementine Fairfax did nothing to deserve what I did. I am saying this here, in front of these people, because she deserves to have the record corrected in the same company where it was damaged." The room did not move for several seconds. Whitfield cleared his throat. "That took something, Harrow." Thaddeus looked at him. "It should have happened sooner." Something shifted in the room then. Not dramatically, but genuinely. The particular adjustment of a group of people who had braced for performance and received honesty instead. Clementine was watching her hands. She made herself look up. She made herself watch him say it. He met her eyes across the room and held them. Afterward, he crossed to her. He did not hurry. He gave her the length of his approach to decide what to do with it. "That was the right thing," she said when he reached her. "It was the minimum," he said. "I know that." "I know you know," she said. "That's worth something." A pause, not uncomfortable but careful, real. "I'd like to speak with you," he said. "Not here, whenever you're willing. There are things I should have said a long time ago." Clementine looked at him. She thought about Rue working through her compound words with the gravity of a girl who has decided that learning is worth the effort. She thought about Mildred's pantry, reorganized. She thought about the 2 trunks she had packed at midnight with only what had always been hers. "You may come to Aunt Mildred's on Thursday," she said. He came on Thursday in plain riding clothes, his hat in his hand when Mildred answered the door. They sat on the porch because the November morning was clear, and talked. Genuinely talked, without the careful social surface that had characterized every conversation in 3 years of marriage. He told her about his father, and she understood within the first quarter hour why coldness had felt like dignity to him, why he had mistaken distance for composure. He said this without using it as excuse. He laid it out like a map of territory he had been living in without knowing its name. She told him about her first year in his house, about arriving with opinions and a way of engaging the world, and understanding within 3 months that these were not welcome in the form she had brought them. She said it without anger, because it was simply true, and she had always been better served by truth than by a softer arrangement of it. He listened. He asked one question at exactly the right moment. She answered it. It took 15 minutes. He did not fill any of those 15 minutes with his own thoughts. When he left, Mildred came to stand at the door and watch him ride out. He listened, Clementine said. For 2 hours, Mildred said. He listened more than he talked. She was quiet a moment. In my experience, that's harder for men like him than most of what they'd call hard. 3 days later he came back. He stood at the door, holding something she recognized, before she had fully looked at it. The cashmere wrap he had given her in the 2nd month of their marriage, which she had left on the hook in her room. He held it in both hands, with the careful grip of a man not accustomed to carrying things that matter and afraid of doing it wrong. "This belongs to you," he said. "It always did. I should not have given you things you felt you needed to leave behind." She took it. The weight was right, the particular softness of it, exactly as she remembered. "I have something to ask you," he said. "I have no standing to ask it and I know it, but I'd like, if you're willing, to try again. Not the way it was before. Something true this time, on whatever terms you name." Clementine held the wrap in both hands and looked at him. She thought about Rue. About the East Room that had become a schoolroom. About what she had built in 6 weeks, out of almost nothing but her own willingness to show up and do the work. She thought about what it would mean to go back. The gravity of that house, the way things got absorbed into it, without anyone deciding they should, the careful shrinking version of herself she had assembled room by room over 3 years. "I'm not going back," she said. He was very still. "Not the house, not that life." She met his gaze without apology. "I have built something here in 6 weeks that I did not have in 3 years, and I will not set it down. Not for a house, not for a name, not for anything that doesn't come alongside it rather than in place of it." He said nothing. He waited for her to finish. "What I can offer you is this," she said. "Come here, sit on this porch. Tell me the truth about who you are without the performance. I will do the same. We will see what that makes, without pressure and without a predetermined answer." She held his gaze steadily. "I am not a woman who closes a door before she knows what's behind it. But I am also not a woman who walks back into a room that was wrong for her, simply because someone is sorry for it." He stood quietly on the porch step with his hat in both hands, and the November light coming pale through the pecan trees. And he looked like a man who has arrived somewhere after a long walk, and is only now beginning to understand what arriving here actually means. "That's more than I came expecting," he said. "Then we're starting from the right place," she said. By December, Clementine Fairfax had opened a school in the East Room of Aunt Mildred's house. 6 children the first week, 9 the second. Rue arrived first each morning and left last each afternoon, and had begun bringing her younger brother, who showed every sign of his sister's particular kind of focused intelligence. Thaddeus came on Thursdays. He came alone, in plain clothes, and sat on the porch and talked with an honesty that Clementine suspected he might have been capable of all along, had anyone ever required it of him. She was not certain what they were building. She had decided she did not need to be certain yet. Certainty could come later, or it might not come at all, and either way she was standing on ground she had made herself. In January, Josiah drove her to town on a clear cold morning for errands. She wore her mother's garnet earrings. She wore the cashmere wrap against the cold. She stopped at the dry goods store, the post office, the milliner's, and at each place she was received with the warmth of people who have watched someone handled badly and are relieved to find them standing. On the road back to Millen, Josiah slowed the carriage for a crossing farm wagon, and Clementine looked out the window and saw, further down the main street, Thaddeus coming out of the county assessor's office. He was in his working clothes. His hat was pulled low against the wind. He had not seen her. She watched him for a moment, this man she had been married to for 3 years, without either of them knowing the other at all. This man who was now coming on Thursdays with his hat in his hands, and saying true things with some effort, and no guarantee, and she felt something in her chest that was not the old hopefulness, brittle and borrowed, but something steadier, something she had earned the right to feel because she had stayed long enough in her own life to know the difference. The farm wagon cleared. Josiah clicked to the horses and the carriage moved on, and Clementine turned back to face the road ahead. The road that went west toward Millen, and the east room full of children, and Rue's primer with her name, written inside the front cover in Clementine's own hand. She had walked out of a dining room in October with 2 trunks and her mother's earrings and 6 sentences that asked for nothing. She had discovered in the month since that nothing was the exact right amount to ask for, because what she had needed, she had already known how to make. The carriage moved through the cold January afternoon, and Clementine Fairfax pressed her back against the seat and watched the Georgia fields go bare and silver under the winter sky, and she smiled, small and private and belonging entirely to herself. Just because it was right to.